So hello everyone. I'd like to show you a new type of device I've been working on, one which I've not been able to find anywhere else on the internet so far, and which I'd like to share with you now because I think it's something really quite useful. Before I properly begin, I should probably say that this video is intended for more experienced players who are going to recognise all the bits and pieces that they're looking at and understand roughly what's going on, or at least be able to figure it out from my description and from attempting to build one of their own. I'm not going to give you a step-by-step construction guide, sorry. So what we have here is an example of a hopper-dropper loop clock that you might use, for example, in a complicated automated farm, triggering different processes at different times to harvest, gather, transport and store the resources produced. I won't go into the details of automated farming here, but if you've been doing that, you might see the potential of a clock like this. Alternately, you could use this for anything you like. Its central component is a clockwise facing loop of alternating hoppers and droppers, with a single block being passed around the loop from dropper to dropper as a synchronized redstone pulse is applied to it from a timer. I like to think of the loop as a kind of clock dial, although loop is probably more accurate. You can use comparators to output redstone signals from the clock at whatever point in the loop you like, and you can place the comparators against either hoppers or droppers, depending on whether you want a short pulse or a longer signal. And you can adjust the speed the clock runs at just by adjusting the speed of the timer that powers it. So to reiterate, this clock has a number of advantages. You can make it as small or large as you like, or any shape you like too, not just a square, so long as you can provide a synchronized pulse to all the droppers in the loop. So here are some smaller examples of this type of clock built around a central timer in white, using 2, 4 and 7 dropper loops. So you can see that it's possible to create numerous variations of this type of clock, even ones using odd numbers. It provides you with multiple potential outputs, either pulses or constant signals, and you can adjust its speed. But as far as disadvantages go, it makes a ticking sound, and you might need to work for a bit in a survival situation to gather enough material for a large clock. Okay, so let's talk about the component parts in this main example. The first part of this first example is the loop on the left. There's a timer in the middle, represented here in white concrete, the actual HD loop, or dial, around that, and finally around the outside in sandstone and other things, of course, a couple of example devices that you might want to attach to such a clock. Firstly, the timer. You need a timer, but it can be any timer you like. This particular timer, one that I really like, is a silent pistonless hopper timer that I found on Etho's channel. That's ETHO. It's a good channel and I recommend you check it out. Anyway, hopper timers are good for powering this kind of clock because you can vary the speed of the clock by varying the number of blocks in the hoppers. So, as long as you don't use more than 5 stacks or less than 1 block. That gives you a range of about half a second through to a bit more than 4 minutes between clock pulses emitted by the central timer. I'm avoiding using the obvious term ticks because that already has a special meaning in Minecraft. I'm going to stick to pulses. For the purposes of this demo, this clock is only using 3 blocks to make things a bit more exciting than it would otherwise be. Although for many practical applications of this type of clock, you might find a much slower timer and smaller loop satisfactory. 75 blocks would produce a clock pulse about once a minute, although if I did that here, it would be like watching paint dry. Secondly, around the timer, we have the HD loop itself. Here we have a loop of 20 hoppers and 20 droppers, a size which I've chosen for the demo purely because the timer fits neatly inside it. Now what happens here is that every time the timer pulses, all the droppers fire, making that ticking sound, and the signal block is fired from the dropper where it currently rests, passes through one or more intervening hoppers at 0.4 seconds per hopper, and stops in the next dropper along. Applying comparators to the hoppers or droppers will produce a short redstone pulse from a hopper as the signal block passes through, or a longer signal from a dropper for as long as the block rests there. Now initially I tried large loops made out of just hoppers, but these require an impractical quantity of circuitry to control and adjacent output signals tend to overlap. Then I tried droppers in large loops similar to this one, but these convey the signal block in the loop forwards inconsistently, sometimes by just the one dropper that you want, but sometimes several at once. I go up these blind alleys so you don't have to. Mixing hoppers and droppers, however, regulates the motion of the signal block to one dropper per signal pulse, and allows you to output pulses as well as longer signals from the loop. Now, it's important to apply the pulse from the timer synchronously to all the droppers in the loop. If you don't, you might find that the loop jumps at some points. The easiest way of doing this is probably to run redstone over a loop of stone running around the inside of the HD loop, as you can see on the left, or to run a loop of redstone directly over the HD loop, as you can see on the right. Note that I initially placed a stone loop on top of the HD loop and ran the redstone loop over that, but the results were oddly buggy. It would stick in places for no obvious reason. If you have problems with your clock, I suggest you check your pulse, make sure there's only one block in the HD loop, and check that it is actually a loop and that none of the hoppers or droppers point the wrong way. Finally, let's talk about what you might want to see attached to the clock. Obviously, for the demo, I've ringed it with redstone lanterns so you can see the clock operating. I've also added some extra lanterns on the left so you can see pulses being emitted from the hoppers as the signal block passes through them. The signal produced by a comparator registering the presence of a single block is quite weak, so unless you're activating something right next to the comparator, you might want to use a redstone repeater right there. Also, the outputs can be quite close together, so take care not to get your wires crossed. Now at the top, I've added a couple of pistons as an example of something you might want to activate with a continuous signal from one of the droppers. As a rule, if you activate it manually with a switch, use a dropper output, but if you'd use a button, use a hopper output. I tend to find, though, that mostly you want hopper outputs, and the rest of the examples are like this. Shown here is a minecart and a few note blocks, and also a dispenser dispensing water and later switching it off. Finally, as you can see at the right, I've added an additional HD loop triggered by the primary loop once per revolution. You could use a secondary loop like this to measure much longer periods of time. You could even build a clock that measures actual seconds, minutes and hours if you really want. Fill your boots. So that about covers it. I hope you found this video useful or at least entertaining, and please like it if you did.